Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to SYCKpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the SYCK Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. And along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba. Today, Alan speaks with someone who turned a negative into a positive with TikTok. She also forged through some lower-paying positions to only evolve into a more lucrative career path. Now, before we get into it with Brittany, let's check in with the sometimes fun, sometimes quirky, sometimes serious side of the personal happenings in the life of Alan Stein. What's new with you this week, Alan?
Hey, Russ. Last week, I spoke about my son Jonah, who landed his first job. My son Lucas also has been hard at work this summer as an apprentice.
So Jonah is the 16-year-old, and Lucas is how old?
16 as well. They are twins,
right,
22 minutes
twins.
apart.
Okay, so
Yes.
What did he get into as far as his career path, or at least the start of it?
And actually, it's 21 minutes apart. My bad on that. So if they're listening, 21 minutes. But what Lucas is doing is he's an apprentice for a local property manager who manages properties and boats. So he's actually exploring some pretty cool stuff up here in Connecticut and helping his mentor, or I don't know what you call the opposite of an apprentice.
I think mentor is good.
Yeah, the guy's name is Jason, but he's working with Jason to help keep the properties in shape, the yachts in shape, and other amazing real estate and property that some of the clients can afford to have, and then can afford to have a property manager. And Lucas is an apprentice working closely with his mentor, Jason.
I see a career in real estate. So more importantly, are they going to get upset with you in the fact that you messed up the minutes apart that the twins are?
If they listen to my podcast, maybe. I'm trying to get them to listen to boost my listenership, but they're too busy playing Fortnite or League of Legends or whatever the hell they do.
Gotcha. Very nice. All right, so you spoke with today's guest while at Supernatural. Can you expand on that a little before we get into it?
Yeah, so Brittany I've worked with for about 6 or 9 months, and I've helped consult and coach her. And she was a phenomenal client and has become a friend over the course of time. She has moved from an excellent copywriter in a tired industry, like working at Georgia Pacific, to leveraging her same skills and capabilities and translating those into Supernatural, which is a VR company, which was bought by Facebook. And then she quickly was able to leverage that because she looked all of a sudden like a tech copywriter. Apple approached her and she leveraged that opportunity to go to Apple. So she has made 2 jumps since talking to me and is working for one of the best tech companies in the world right now.
Very exciting. And you said was bought out by
Facebook.
Now they call themselves Meta. Isn't everything going to be bought out by Meta before it's all said and done?
It's possible, although there is some concern after yesterday's earnings where they actually lost revenue for their first time ever since being a public company. But they're okay. They have some pretty big bank accounts. Just
an anomaly. And of course, that was, we're speaking at the time of this recording. So who knows by the time you're listening to this, what's going on now. All right, so let's get into it with Brittany.
I'm so excited to have Brittany Williams on our latest edition of Steer Your Career with Kadima podcast, the SYCK podcast. Brittany and I met about 1.5 years ago when I found her when I was looking for copywriting support for Kadima. I found her, I don't know, she was well referred in some article that I read. I read some of her work. I was like, I got to meet this woman, Brittany. I reached out to her. We established a partnership. She started writing some stuff for us at Kadima. And then she wound up becoming a client of Kadima. And it's been awesome to get to know Brittany and see her success. And she's most recently accepted a fantastic job at Supernatural, which is soon to be part of Meta, the Meta universe, or the metaverse, as Mark Zuckerberg likes to call it. So I'm not going to steal too much more thunder of Brittany, but I'm just going to hand it off to Brittany for her to introduce herself. I just want to say, I love your LinkedIn bio where you say your personal tagline is keep creating and keep evolving. So with that,
Yeah.
I'd love to hand it off to you, hear a little bit more about you and what keep creating, keep evolving means to you.
Yeah, definitely. Like Alan said, we met almost like about a year and a half ago through content. That's sort of what my background has been, is like content writing, copywriting, things sort of within that wheelhouse. And I think that's like my career trajectory, and the tagline that I have, keep creating, keep evolving, is a perfect kind of example of that, because I've definitely had several roles in the past. I did a lot of contracting before looking at more like, full-time roles, because I was kind of just trying to figure out my niche and what I really wanted to do and what I like. So I started out doing like communications, more technical writing types of jobs. And then I decided that I wanted to do something more creative. So I kind of started taking steps towards that and just seeing like, okay, what are they actually looking for? I did a lot of kind of self-teaching things at that point, worked at an agency, kind of got my feet wet in that space. But it kind of got to a point where I realized I was just bouncing around from like, kind of like the same companies, especially here in Atlanta, because there's like only a few that are, I guess, considered like the, top companies in the city. So you have like your Deltas, your Home Depots. Also, before getting the role at Supernatural was at Georgia Pacific. So all of these companies, I think LinkedIn has ranked most of these companies, if not all of them, as like top companies, like literally on LinkedIn's list. They might even kind of be like within the first 10 or 15. And although these are great companies, I just felt like, being able to progress was very slow. If you weren't in certain spaces, like, me being a creative and kind of working within these, larger corporate organizations, like they may have in-house agencies that kind of, need my skill set. But it was just sort of like, they may have limited roles for that. They didn't always have like full-time opportunities. What I would find is that most people would start out as contractors and then kind of work their way up to full-time and hopefully, kind of like, oh, I hope I get a full-time offer. Like there wasn't a lot of agency in that sense. I felt like I did kind of like as much as I could, but you kind of got to that point where it was like, okay, you're kind of stuck here and you're just making lateral moves and you're not really progressing per se. And definitely not a lot with compensation either. Like that was very slow and, kind of hard to do. I originally met Alan and kind of worked with him on some content. I got reached out to by a recruiter at TikTok. And I was surprised because I'm like, I don't even know if I have the background for this type of role. Like, how do they even look at my profile and say, hey, this might be a good person for us to consider? And it was for a UX writer role. And I was familiar with UX writing, but again, I was coming from content writing and copywriting. So I didn't necessarily know if my skills would translate into this space or how well it would. But I was like, I'm going to just reach out to Alan and see kind of what his advice is on that. And I got past the recruiter screen, made it to the hiring manager. Had a great conversation with the hiring manager, but realized that like my portfolio just really wasn't there. But I mean, that kind of really is what acted as like a catalyst for me to say, hey, maybe I should look into tech and look into that space, because obviously they need the skill set. I just don't necessarily at that time didn't know how to like package it well enough to kind of make it past that stage in the process.
And that's a great intro, Brittany. And when TikTok reached out to you, I'm assuming they reached out to you via LinkedIn.
Yep.
And after that, you and I reconnected, I believe, after that situation. And we talked a little bit about preparation for that process. Where was your head at when a recruiter reached out to you and they said, oh, we think you're special. We want to hire you for TikTok. Where was your head at and what was your thought process through that whole TikTok experience?
That was a great question. Like the whole time I was just kind of like, especially in the beginning, I'm like, why me? Like they reached out to me. Like, is this real? Like I didn't know if it was real at first. I like had to check the recruiter's like information. Like I checked his LinkedIn page and I was like trying to like make sure it was legit, because I was like, this is kind of, crazy. And I'm sure everyone kind of this to some extent, like you just kind of have that imposter syndrome. Like, well, I know I'm probably not going to get it, but one thing about me just personally, I'm like, okay, well, I'll at least like give it a shot, give it a try. But I think because this was like, I'd never had an opportunity to really talk to any tech companies at this level. I never had them like reach out to me. The first time I had contact with a tech company, I applied directly for that role. So for this, for them to like just reach out to me randomly, I kind of was like, well, that's interesting. And then I kind of started thinking about, well, what about my background may have been appealing? What may have like popped up in their search results and kind of what they're looking for. And that kind of made me like go actually look at the role and see if I, was actually a match for it.
After that experience, so you met with a recruiter, you met with a hiring manager, and at that point, it didn't get past the hiring manager stage, right?
Right. I didn't get past the hiring manager
stage. What did they tell you at that point?
Yeah. So, but I had a great conversation with the hiring manager. So they really liked me and they wanted to keep in touch, is what they told me. And so, funny enough, I've actually been able to keep in touch with the hiring manager. I had a conversation with her, I guess about a month or so ago now, maybe right before I started with Supernatural. So I actually am able, like I've kind of poured with her now. She's actually been, like when I had the conversation, she was like, well, we have some roles that are coming up that are going to be opening. And if you find that this is something that you like to do, luckily enough, this role is allowing me to kind of build up my portfolio with some of that skill set that I didn't have before. So once I kind of really do more of that work here in this role, I'll be a lot more, I guess, prepared for a role like at a place like TikTok. So she was very interested in, like, she was like, let me know how it goes. I want to hear about your experience there, just kind of keep me posted on everything and, keep in touch. So it wasn't, even though it was a rejection, it's like, this was like the first experience that taught me, like, this is kind of how you start building relationships with people at these companies, and your network is sort of like how your next opportunity might end up coming to you.
That's a great point. And as I often share with people, when you get rejected for a role, which is the case here at TikTok, you can either get rejected outright where they may not even send a response to you, or they just ghost you, or often is the case, we like you, you just fell short a little bit here, or we hired somebody else. That opportunity gives you the ability to build and develop a relationship with that individual. Did you connect with that recruiter on LinkedIn? And it sounds like that recruiter has reached out to you since, and you guys are maintaining a relationship post that rejection. So it was maybe a temporary rejection. So how have you actively maintained that relationship with this recruiter?
Yeah. So I was actually able to connect with someone through the Kadima method, setting up informational interviews. So yeah, I was doing informational interviews and I found someone who worked at TikTok, who worked in content strategy, which is kind of under that UX writing umbrella. And she actually worked on the same team as the hiring manager. So I was able to connect with her and kind of get a little bit more insight there, start building rapport with her, built a relationship with her, had a really great conversation, gave me a lot of insight from everything from like compensation to culture, and just her own trajectory in terms of like kind of how she got into UX writing and what types of skill set and types of thinking that they're looking for in these types of roles. But then I also joined this ADP list mentor, and the hiring manager was there as a mentor. She was offering like slots to just kind of UX writing mentor advice. So I signed up for that. And, and she was actually like really glad to see my name pop up. Like she was actually, looking forward to having a conversation with me, because I was like, I don't even know if she remembers me at this point, but she definitely did. And that kind of it was just a way of me like to keep that conversation going and just, kind of maintain a positive outlook, kind of let her know what the latest was with me, with going into this role and kind of what I was looking for and where I was at. So she also gave me lots of good insight, kind of like more than what I got out of the interview, right? It was more about kind of here's where we're going as a team. She had recently been promoted as well, like since, my initial interview with her. So I mean, I think all of that is just more positive for me. Like in the future, if I were to, get an opportunity to go there, it's like now the people that I've already built these relationships with are in a little bit more positions of like power or agency. So if my name were to pop up, now I have some kind of like, there's some context there already, and they already are informed about what I'm doing and know that I'm probably going to be somewhat of a good fit just because they know what I've been working on. They know what skill sets I've been developing. They know what I had already. And I kind of just needed to add a little bit of like icing on top that was specific to these types of roles. So it was definitely like, I think, a very strong method. And like, you can't really, like, those informational interviews are so key because you just never know how valuable they'll be. Like when I reached out to the person who was at TikTok who worked on the hiring manager's team, I had no idea that would be the case. That just is kind of how it happened. Right. And so, yeah, I think it's important to kind of take those somewhat seriously, just because you never know who you're going to talk to. You never know what position they might be in to kind of help you set you up for later down the road, and or where they may themselves end up. They may end up somewhere else in an even better position at a different company that is just as great, if not better. So.
And what was the name of that mentorship organization?
Yeah, I believe it's adplist.org.
Okay. What's ADP stand for? Do you know?
I'm honestly not even sure.
Okay.
I'll have to look that up.
ADP list. And you mentioned the value of informational interviews. So how would you define what an informational interview is, and how did you use that as part of your effective job search?
Yeah, so a lot of it is reaching out to people on LinkedIn through, I would say starting out with your first degree connections, if you have them, or finding some kind of commonality, like you just in the Kadima program. Either, maybe you have the same alma mater, or you worked at another company previously, like the same company, either whether it was at the same time or different times, like you have that company history in your background. Use that kind of as a way to reach out to them and say, hey, I see that you've worked at, we both worked at this company. I see that you're now at this company. I'm also looking to make a similar transition, would love to connect. Sometimes I would send out the connection request first and then ask, if they had time to set up like a meeting with me. But then sometimes, just depending on, like, if I knew that they knew someone that I personally worked with or something like that, I was more likely to just go ahead and say, hey, we'd love to set up a call, because I figure they would be a little bit more open to it, because you've named people that they know. You're not just like a totally random stranger. So doing a lot of those, and also you might not get a lot of responses on those. I know there was a lot I sent out that people either didn't connect with me, or they just didn't respond, or they said they would, be happy to set up a call, and then I never heard anything else from them. But for the people who are willing to do that, I found the majority of them to be very valuable. They gave me a lot of great insight. They gave me a lot of great information. Even when it came down to preparing for interviews, I had people send me their presentations that they use to get their jobs. So, that's sort of invaluable, right? Because I know that was sort of one of the struggles I had with the TikTok role the first time. I'm like, I can put something together, but I have no idea what they're looking for. I'm just looking on Google trying to find stuff, but that's not necessarily, as helpful as someone actually sending you hey, this is exactly what I used for my interview process. And then they can actually walk you through it. And then you can see okay, I can actually take examples of work that I've done. Because if I had that before, I would have been able to probably make it past that point. So, I think the sooner you can get started with those, if you know that this is the path you want to take, the better, because you're going to get the information that you need from a lot of people that are going to set you up to be able to kind of come into these roles a little bit stronger, be a stronger candidate.
And that's so critical. You form these relationships, you build these relationships, and you learn new things. You indicated that someone actually told you what they shared for their portfolio for the interview. But you also mentioned that you reached out to a lot of people and didn't get responses. So how did you manage through that rejection or the lack of response? Because that's part of the game. How did you persevere throughout that?
Well, as you know, Alan, I'm a little bit more of an introvert, so I wasn't really excited about reaching out to people and trying to talk to people more than I had to for my regular job already anyways. I didn't do well with it at the beginning at all. I even questioned whether or not I was a good fit for this program, and should I even be doing this? And it may just be more of an ego thing on a psychological level, because you're wow, why would they not want to respond? Or these people think that they're better than me because they work here, and that kind of stuff. You're going through all this stuff in your head, but it's really just all in your head. So you really have to get comfortable with rejection, with knowing that a lot of people aren't going to respond to you. And it may be for various reasons. Maybe they don't have the time, they don't want to make the time, or they just don't want to, and they don't have to. That's perfectly fine. So I think once you kind of get that in your head, you're good. And just know that 9 times out of 10, even if those people were to if you were to kind of keep following up with them and then finally get them to do a call with you, they probably wouldn't be as valuable as someone who was more eager to respond and connect with you. And those people I find were way more helpful than someone that I had to kind of keep following up with or something like that. So I would say just perseverance and getting comfortable with rejection is going to be necessary to be successful. And I think too, knowing that if you already don't have, fortunately for me, I had already kind of worked at some bigger named companies. So I kind of had that a little bit on my side. So I would say that if you don't necessarily have that be even more prepared for people to kind of like, maybe not be as willing. Cause I think there's like this kind of unspoken thing going on, like, with networking, cause they want to know, I think in some cases, what value can you bring to these conversations to them as well? And that was something unexpected that I kind of ran into doing these informational interviews, which I think is something to keep in mind. Even with when I got the referral for TikTok, when I tried to apply for the second role, this was someone I worked with when I was at Delta. She was like our brand partner, like salesperson. And it was sort of like, hey, we're still trying to get Delta to do XYZ. Like, would you mind, asking the hiring manager or asking like someone there in a leadership position if we could come do like this workshop? So it's sort of like, hey, if you do this favor for me, I'll do this referral for you. And I don't think she would have like not given the referral, but I think it definitely kind of helps, sweeten the deal a little bit. So don't be surprised, I guess, if things like that come up, because I mean, everyone's time is valuable. So I think if you can find a way to make it valuable for them too, that's also a benefit. That's also a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I think it's a little less of the quid pro quo kind of like, but it's more building relationships. That's how I always see it. And I always advise people when they have these informational interviews as a great final question of, hey, thank you very much for taking the time to tell me about TikTok or tell me about Supernatural. Is there anything I can do to help you? And often you won't get a request. Sometimes you will. Like, hey, we're looking for this Delta deal with TikTok and help us get some traction there. So how did you stumble upon the Supernatural role?
Yep, you were actually part of the program. I remember you sending out some job boards that may be good for us to look through that weren't, I know I wasn't as familiar with, like, so Built-in was one of them. And I remember just kind of like scanning through, because I know a lot of those companies, some of them on there more like small to medium sized tech companies. But again, I was looking for something that I knew I would actually be interested in, because my main goals coming into the program was that I wanted better pay, but I also wanted interesting work. And I wanted to be able to make an impact where I was at. Of course, big tech is eventually like still the main goal. And I mean, kind of happened or is happening anyways. But I was looking for, a company where I had the skill set for it. And if I didn't have connections there, that I was like a really good match for it. So when I saw the job description, it was for a senior copywriter role. And I had been looking to get a senior copywriter role. I had kind of been making these lateral moves, trying to get there for the past few years, and just hadn't been able to break through, even though I was operating already sort of at a senior level as a copywriter. So that appealed to me. And then I looked at the job description and I saw that like literally everything that they were asking for, I had done. I had worked with big brands. I had, I knew how to work cross-functionally with all these different teams. The only difference was that I hadn't worked in a tech space, but I literally had everything that they were looking for otherwise. So I just decided to go ahead and apply. I know I worked with you to kind of trim my resume down, because I think at the time, when I started my resume, it was probably like 4 pages or something ridiculous. But I had a lot of experience. I just wasn't sure how to like condense it well enough, So definitely helped having that resume review. I got a lot more hits once I got it down to 2 pages. So I submitted my resume, and that was pretty much it for that one. Like, I know I kind of did a little bit of background research, but I realized I really didn't know anybody there. But I felt like I was a strong enough fit on paper to at least give it a shot. And I think I heard back from the recruiter maybe couple weeks after I submitted my application.
Cool.
Yep.
And once you had the recruiter and the the recruiter screen, how did you prepare for that call?
Yeah. So for the recruiter screen, really it was about just making sure that whatever they asked, that I said yes to, and that I was able to maybe provide just high level snippets, not getting too detailed or too specific about anything, but just saying, yes, I have done this. Yes, I've done that. They asked about, are you open to relocation? I said, yes. They asked about compensation, and kind of like, tried to push that off as much as possible, just saying that, based on this role and in my experience, I'm open to being paid whatever is commensurate with that or is in line with that. But they definitely do like push. They want to know, how much, I guess, to make it not a waste of time for either party. But I think with them, the recruiter did kind of push. So I ended up giving a really wide range at that time. And since they were talking about relocation, I'm thinking in my mind, like, well, this number may change anyways, if that is an actual possibility. But yeah, I will say most of them won't push too hard, but some will. They want some kind of number. They want some kind of range thrown out in that initial conversation to see if it makes sense to keep going, which in some cases it does. I think I found another role on that same site that I did a recruiter screen for, and I told them what I was looking for. Well, no, I didn't tell them. And then they ended up telling me that I think they were only able to do like 80. And so at that point, I knew it was not beneficial for either of us to continue that conversation, so that kind of makes sense in some cases. So they might have a hard set number budget wise. But yeah, that was pretty much the gist of that first recruiter screen conversation. I think they also just kind of want to get some companies may not, but somewhat of a little bit of a personality fit. I think they might be looking for too. And I think for Supernatural, since they're a smaller startup company, they were kind of looking at that as well.
Yeah. And the comp discussion, you very often can punt. It sounds like this one might have been a little bit tougher for you to do so, but I highly recommend people to push that off, similar to what you said of like, hey, I just want to get paid what is in line with the scope and the impact of the role. Push that off as long as possible. Like the recruiter wants to know that so that they're not wasting their time. But for most people that are in the job search process, it behooves you to move along as long as possible, because once you get that offer at the end of the process of getting past the recruiter, getting past the hiring manager, getting past the loops, and then they decide that they want Brittany, then you have leverage. And if you don't anchor on something ahead of time, that gives you a lot more flexibility later. But sometimes if you do get that data, like $80,000 early on, you're like, hey, not worth my time. That's an okay thing to say. But it was also interesting on the relocation where I know that was something that was a barrier for you, but you're like, okay, I'll be open to this. Let's see where this goes. And the offer wound up occurring and you're still working in Atlanta. So you did not have to relocate. There might be an opportunity down the road, but you're starting there. You're part of Supernatural, which is a company that is being in the midst of being acquired by Meta. So now you're working at one of the FANGs.
Yep.
So for folks that can't see you on the podcast, you happen to be a Black woman. What was unique from your perspective of coming into these organizations? I'm assuming that not too many people that you were meeting with, either for informationals or for the interviews, were Black women, just because looking at the demographics of all these tech organizations, they're 3-4% Black and a lot lower percent Black.
Yeah, I think most of it was sort of like expected. I kind of expected that going in, but fortunately I was able to actually connect with at least, I think there were at least like maybe 3 or 4 that I had that were Black women who were at tech companies, and they were at bigger ones like Google and PayPal. But hearing their experiences within these environments, I think was definitely super helpful because, once you get in there, you realize that, you're just not there. And if you are there, they're probably like in other departments or other, like you're having to actually kind of go out your way a little bit more to connect with these people. Like it's not like you're just going to like come in and automatically have that access to other people who look like you in this space. And obviously the experiences are significantly different oftentimes. I think that you definitely have a little bit more ability to like be yourselves in these places, but it takes a while to kind of like adjust. And then you kind of have to figure out, well, how much of myself kind of can I be? And then you're also thinking, well, I know I had to I don't know if my process was the same as somebody else's. Like, did I have to kind of do more or show more or prove more to even get to this stage? I think with this particular role, because I didn't have a referral or anything, it really came down to like doing their due diligence to see if I was competent enough even for the role. So like when I went through the loops, for example, most of my interviews, I felt positively about them, but they were asking questions that kind of were, they definitely wanted to see what my thinking, like my thought process for things, but they also were looking at like, they asked questions like, what's your creative process? Like, how do you even like to work with other people? And what does that look like? And almost sort of like, what's your philosophy for how you go about creative work? And, I didn't have to do like presentation or anything per se, but I think that the interviews themselves, the way the types of questions that they were asking me was sort of me doing that, because I had to speak to, work that I'd done in the past and then what my role was in that. So I don't know. I feel like everyone has a bit of imposter syndrome, but I do think that when you're coming in, and like this particular role was a very high need for them at the time too. I don't know how many other people that they interviewed and that they spoke with. I don't know how important it was that it be someone who was diverse as someone who's coming in to help shape the entire voice of this brand. But once I looked at the core values and kind of saw, okay, well, this is sort of what they're going for, then I thought that may have had something to do with it, because they're looking to be more inclusive. They're looking to be more diverse and all of these other things. I just so happen to have all the other background that they also wanted. So I probably had to have a little bit more coming in the door, honestly, just to even be considered, like, and being a Black woman, like, I think it, I can't say for sure, but I do think that, you got to have your stuff together. Like, you really can't have any room, like for them to kind of poke holes in your experience or in your knowledge base. Like, they want to know that you know the job, but then that you also have the experience to handle other things that might come up, because everything that you're going to be dealing with is not always something that's happened before, especially in a startup environment. So how much agency do you have? Like, are you able to kind of make decisions and, quickly? And are you qualified enough for that? And what is their definition of being qualified? That's another thing.
Did you feel to an extent that you were a disadvantage because of maybe some perspectives or stereotypes that they would have had coming in, and that you had to be all that much better? Or did you feel as if you were on an even playing field?
I didn't necessarily feel disadvantaged. My interview loops, they're only my manager, who is like of Asian descent. Everyone else were white men. So,
well, welcome to Silicon Valley.
Right. Like the higher up, the roles went, the more male and white they got. So, there was nothing that happened that made me feel like, uncomfortable or negatively. But like I said, like, it's definitely like they weren't like playing around either. Like, they wanted to know that you knew like what you were talking about, and that you weren't just kind of, BSing your way through it either. Everyone was definitely nice enough, but yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say I felt disadvantaged, but I did feel like I had to be maybe a little more buttoned up. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And you've been there for 2 months now, about?
Yeah, almost.
Have you seen anybody in person yet?
Not yet. The plan is for me to actually go out there in May. So that'll be like my first time actually meeting people in person.
How is it to onboard in COVID and to onboard as a Black woman, where there's, like you mentioned, the people that interviewed you were a bunch of white dudes, plus like an Asian woman referred to. But like, are there ERGs there, employee resource groups, or how have you, like, it's hard to onboard to any company. It's hard to onboard during COVID, and it's hard to onboard when you look around and you don't see anyone who looks like you.
So I will say this particular company, they were pretty organized with the onboarding. They gave me like a 30, 60, 90 day, essentially like a plan, kind of what the expectations were for those benchmarks. I personally went out of my way to find other Black people at this company before I came in the door, and I connected with them on LinkedIn. Some of them I kind of had like brief conversations with beforehand, and there's not really that many, but I connected. And then once I kind of came in and officially started, like, set up one-on-ones with them as well, and just kind of got their perspectives and, how they were liking it. Because I thought that was important for me too, like even before I came in the door, like to just be like, hey, do I see any kind of like red flags, like right away? And that wasn't the case. So I was glad about that. But yeah, I had to take the initiative on that to connect with others. And I think, and I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question?
Just like the challenges of coming in, like in COVID.
The onboarding.
I don't know what the metrics are of Supernatural. Facebook has, I think, 4.5% of their employee base is Black, and 35% is women. So I'm assuming Supernatural is not so different. Like, even though you're not part of Facebook.
Yeah. And it's interesting because even in my first month, some of that stuff has already come up, right? Like they were working on something for AAPI, and they put together these playlists. The content team is primarily white. So a lot of the artists that they pulled, it was sort of like very
Billy Joel and like...
It was like typical. It's like they weren't really doing enough research to really try to say, hey, we have an opportunity here to give voices to, Asian American artists who may not be as well known, or maybe a better representation of what this month is really about. But because we don't have anybody that's working in there that, knows or even is it like taking that perspective, like it's showing up in the work, right? So then it may become where it's almost like a burden on the minorities in that group to like say, hey, we should be doing this and we should be thinking about it that way, which can sometimes make more work for you.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think the companies, they do genuinely want to do what's right. Because when we had a conversation about it, we all came together and everyone was like, yeah, we agree. Like, let's try to make this right. Let's see what we can do. Like, we may not have licenses for all these artists' music, but we're gonna take another look at it. And they did, and they updated the playlist. And I was like, wow, like that's amazing. Like if this had happened at, a Home Depot or somewhere, this would not have happened. It just would not. It would have taken too long. It would have had to go through too much red tape. Like people would have been like, that's nice, but maybe next year,
Yeah.
So I think that part is interesting, even just within my first month of kind of just seeing how things are done. But I know for me, even with just like regular kind of like paperwork onboarding stuff, I made it a point to kind of do a lot of that up front. They were very quick about sending my equipment out and everything. So I tried to get as much of that out the way as possible. Even though you have a 30, 60, 90-day plan, you're going to get thrown in pretty quickly. So I think just knowing that it might be helpful for people. Like the pace is definitely pretty fast. And if you came in saying that you were very experienced, you will be tested on that very quickly, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just, like I think at some of these like other bigger, more traditional companies, you might sit around like your first 2 weeks and just like twiddle your thumbs and not even have a computer and like, all this stuff. So that's not the case with these companies at all. They're very efficient in that sense. So yeah, onboarding there was efficient, but I think it's just the meeting people and knowing who is who and who to talk to for this and that. That part can be difficult, but that's where building relationships also can kind of come into play.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about that. So you came from Home Depot, Georgia Pacific, Delta, very traditional, old school companies. Now you're moving into this really fast moving organization. Sounds like a lot of it's been positive. What have been some of the challenges from a culture perspective, from a work perspective?
Yeah. And I think, and I'll jump back to informational interviews once again, because I actually spoke with a former coworker I had at Home Depot, who's now at Etsy. And I kind of asked him like, what were some of the differences that he saw that may have been challenges, right? And he was saying that overall, the experience is great. It's great that things move fast. It's great that there's not a whole lot of red tape, but then sometimes that can be a bad thing because things are going out the door quickly and it may be errors or stuff is wrong, or also the hierarchy tends to be a bit more flat. So sometimes in terms of getting decisions made on things, it's kind of like, it can go back and forth until somebody kind of like puts their foot down and says, hey, this is what's happening. And that may come from someone who is in a technically leadership position or just some other member of the team. Like they don't really operate based on, I guess, seniority in terms of titles. It's just like, who has the best idea that we all agree that makes the most sense? And we're going to just go with that, which is good, right? But in some cases, it can get a little messy. But I think, just kind of, that's where like, being respectful, being understanding, having a little bit of patience with things, understanding that there isn't a process for everything yet. And I know for me, once again, I said I wanted to come in and have an impact, right? So having the opportunity to do just that, like helping to build a brand style guide and help them have a more consistent voice, noticing some inconsistencies in how we run our process. And then, the majority of this company is engineers and like developers and stuff like that. So a lot of the processes are reflected by how they work, not necessarily how other parts of the company work. So like we're using Atlassian, there's like Jira tickets for stuff that you're working on, which may not always make the most sense for someone in like marketing and design and, stuff like that. But just kind of understanding how they work and then understanding like our own processes and workflows, and then just trying to, not come in like guns ablazing saying, hey, this needs to change, this should be different, but just seeing where you can fold in maybe some things that, from like a process standpoint or something that might help make people's lives easier. Because at least I'll say this, they will listen, especially if it's a good idea and it's something that makes sense. Like people will listen to it. And if it's good and they like it, like they'll adopt it right away. There's not going to be a whole long, like a council that has to sit down and talk about it. Like at some of these bigger companies, they're in the interest of like whatever's going to help us move quickly and get to the next thing, you know.
Well, we're running low on time, Brittany, but the last two questions I always like to ask people is one, if people want to reach out to you or follow you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you, get in contact with you? I know you're a bit of an introvert, but if folks want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
Yeah, definitely on LinkedIn. I'm just Brittany E. Williams on LinkedIn. That'll probably be the best way.
That's how I found you. That's how TikTok found you. So yeah, that's
Yep.
a good way to find Brittany. And the other question is, it sounds like a lot of your success has come through outreach and building relationships, but what SYCK tips would you give to our audience here of how they can best accelerate their careers?
Yeah, I would say, especially if they're considering even joining this program, really start thinking about exactly what you want in your next role. Like, be intentional about that, because the more focused and the more confident you can be in that, it'll help you like when you go to build your narrative, like for your interviews and things like that. And also be a little bit more like secure and like saying, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want. This is where I know I kind of want to be. This is what I know I'm strong in. And I think that'll make you a stronger candidate. But then also being personable. I think when you talked about this quite a bit, like being likable is a large part of this too, which may sound whatever, but it's true. I think people are a lot more like willing to help you and things like that. If they like you a little bit and they want to vouch for someone that they like and that they think is a good fit based on personality a lot of times, because skills can be taught. So I would say that too. But then also just being consistent and persevering, because this process takes work. It's just like another job.
Yeah.
So don't think you're going to go and like do a couple of informational interviews and like apply to a couple of jobs a week and that's going to get you where you want to go. Like, no, you're going to have to really buckle down, build that list out, reach out to these people regularly, make it a part of your day to day, you know. And like I got into this role and I don't do as many informationals and things like that, but I still do them. I still find opportunities to do them. And there's always like creative ways that you can think of to kind of like, you know, continue to build these relationships out and work with people on things and kind of just keep those relationships going, because you never know when your next opportunity is going to come. So
yeah. And your network is your net worth, people say, and it provides compound value over the course of your career. So whether you work at TikTok down the road, now you have an advocate at TikTok. I know there's other companies that are starting to reach out to you now that you've updated your LinkedIn profile. So that network will come in valuable. So I think you summarized one, like knowing what you want, like the goals to achieve, then being likable, like building those relationships, but influencing people to help you and to be willing to like you. And then the consistency and the perseverance, because the job search is tumultuous and there's lots of rejection there, but then there's success. And it's awesome to see you succeeding in your new role. I know you and I chatted for weeks and months and lots of ups and downs, but lots of forward progress. You met lots of great people and you got an awesome role.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I'm very appreciative. Yeah. So I would highly recommend if you're in a position where you're ready for a change and you're ready to actually kind of take more control over your career, this is definitely a great move.
Cool, Brittany. Well, thank you so much. It's been great getting to know you, and you are a very likable person. And I know that's a tinged word nowadays, but I don't know, I'll use it. And it's been great getting to know you over the last couple of years. And I look forward to several more years of seeing your progress and seeing you accelerate your career.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Alan. I appreciate this. This is great.
You know, I love how you give your listeners something different and something they can always take away with your interviews. Special thanks to Brittany for hanging out with Alan, and a special thanks to you, the listeners, for joining us on the SYCK podcast. Make sure you connect with us at SYCKpodcast.com to get started on steering your career with Kadima. That's SYCK. Alan, you're constantly updating the website, or your people are constantly updating the website. What's good to check out?
Lots of great stuff there. There are resumes to download. You can download my actual resume and edit it to your liking. There are interview tips and tricks. There's news about upcoming events. And the best way for you to keep on top of this is go to SYCKpodcast.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you'll hear all the great, free, exciting events that will accelerate your career.
Very good. We hope you've enjoyed this episode with Brittany, and you're going to love the next one.